There we go. Hello, Chantal.
We
How are you
did
doing?
it.
We got
Welcome.
it.
Welcome
We
to
did
In
it.
Their Own Words, in your own words.
I know.
We
I'm
are,
very excited.
yeah, no, we're excited to hear what you have to say. You are what we consider, I guess, a up and coming in USTA New England. You've been doing so many amazing things out there. So why don't we start with you telling us your tennis story and what led you to your new CTA, Six Love?
Yes. I always like to say that my tennis story is random. But, my mom always says, God always has a plan for us. So, that's why you are where you are. But for me, I would say my tennis story started when I was 4 years old. That's when my dad first put a racket in my hand. He used to have me at a park in Stanford called Scalzi Park. We would just play there every day growing up, and then I started to get a little bit better. And then he did. He made it mandatory. Every day I had to play tennis for an hour before I could play basketball, and I always considered myself back then to be the next, Michael Jordan. I didn't think I would ever be the tennis person I am today. But he used to make me play for an hour all the time. Then I kind of dropped off in middle school from tennis because I started to play a lot more basketball. I was doing a couple more leagues and stuff. But then I got to high school and my grades weren't the greatest. So my dad wouldn't let me try out for the basketball team. But I improved my grades. He let me try out for tennis. And I actually missed the tennis tryouts. And I showed up the first day of practice. And he was like, well, if you do good enough today, then you can stay on the team. And so I played for McMahon for 4 years. I ended up being captain my junior and senior year just because of dedication. And my junior year, we actually had a couple of seniors on the team. So it wasn't just because of seniority, but it was just because of my leadership and hard skills that I, was working at. Then I started teaching at 15. I got a part of a program called the Norwalk Mayor's Program. And I actually, one of the guys my dad's was friends with, and he trained me. He uh, he had a tennis company, and he says, if you get the Norwalk Mayor's Program, I'll hire you for the summer, and you can teach with us. So 15 years old, I said, okay, let's do it. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but all right. So I started teaching tennis at 15. Next year, he promoted me to head pro. So at 16 years at 16 years old, I was basically running a summer camp for Marvin Tyler, Slammer Tennis World. We used to have meetings. I used to lead meetings with the groups before the week with all the staff. We used to go to Garden Catering to do our meetings. And then I worked there for 4 years before I went off to college in Bethany, where they gave me an academic scholarship and they gave me some merit scholarship to play tennis. So I ended up going to Bethany for 3 years. I was the coach gave me a great warning on my phone call. He says, we're not the greatest team here, but we would really like it if you came to help build a program. So I said, okay, I mean, whatever, let's go, let's do it. So before I left Bethany College in West Virginia, I ended up being captain my junior year. And we actually made the states, and it was the first time that we made the playoffs, and I think it was 15 years. So it was a huge accomplishment, and we were ranked to finish last that year. So we shocked the world and ended up finishing eight. Third. Then after that, I was still teaching on and off. I wasn't really working with Slammer Tennis World anymore. So I was working for a couple of Stanford Parks and Recs programs. And working with the Stanford Parks and Recs program, I really started to see that, like, wow, maybe this coaching thing is, it could have a career for me, because I was starting to see the influence I had on kids and on other coaches. So my second year at the Stanford Parks and Recs, I was asked again to start training people for 10 and under tennis. And at this time, I was still 19. So it was very awkward at first, being 19 and training some kids that are older than me and some people that were younger than me. but it was also still a great experience. Then wintertime came, and I was actually working at a restaurant called Bogies, and I was working with these two guys every Sunday. And one day the guy asked me, he goes, "What do you want to do the rest of your life?" And I go, "Well, I really like teaching tennis. I think that I may have a career in it. I've been teaching a couple of times this summer." And he goes, "Well, I know a guy who owns a couple of clubs. His name is Jeff Goki. And, I'll give him a call. He owes me a couple of favors. He'll definitely get back in contact with you." So I reached out to Jeff. I got a job at Kings Highway, Charles Vandermeer. He gave me my first, I would say, big boy tennis job. And they also connected me with Stanford Youth. So it was a really cool experience because first getting into Kings Highway, I didn't have that much court time, so I was doing a lot of behind the desk stuff. But at Stanford Youth, it was just a group of 30 kids, and they were doing just line drills, and they were like, "Well, we want you to really rebuild our program and help us become a stronger program." And I was 20 at the time, so with no real experience about how to build a program, and I said okay, and that's when I started to meet people like you, and I worked a lot with Linda Kremen. She was awesome. Linda, I'll love her to the end of the day. Um, and from there, I built Stanford Youth up from just being, 30 kids in line drills to doing junior team tennis. We went to the U.S. Open. We were doing 10 and under tournaments. I mean, we were running a program on all 6 courts. And that's when I think I really started to realize that, you know, tennis was my passion, and that, this is what I see myself doing for the rest of my life. Then Stanford and Norwalk had a merger. I just decided personally not to continue on with the program. But from that, I went back to school, and I actually met a girl named Leslie Allen. And she was the one that really showed me the way of how to take, being just the tennis pro and, really making a career. And it was with her and her Win for Life training. And you too, Chantel, because I would have never met Leslie if it wasn't because of USTA Dive. So
Yeah.
meeting Leslie at in Austin, Texas, and us just going through all of those different events and meetings there, and just talking to people who did have CTAs. And I met Johnny Ash, Arthur Ashe's brother, and Katrina Adams, and just talking to them and seeing their stories and seeing how they started up their own programs, and they say it was never really a business or anything like that for them, but it was just their passion. And I realized for me it was never about a business, but just the passion that I have. And I've always wanted my friends to play tennis with me, and it's always been my biggest thing because I can go play tennis with my dad or a couple of people at the park, but with my own peers I've never been able to. It's always been, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Let's go shoot some hoops." So a lot of my internal drive, I think, just comes from never being able to just play with my own peers, just being able to pick up the phone and text the people I went to middle school and high school with and saying, "Let's go, hit some tennis balls." It was always, "Oh, I'm going to go hit and then I'll meet you guys afterwards." So I always really wanted to do that for my community. And I always went to the Carver Center of Norwalk and the Boys and Girls Club of Stanford. So then I started thinking, how can I do this? How can I, show my community the same thing? And boom, Six Love started. And my executive director, Louisa, we I gave her a proposal and the ending of December last year. And I was like, I really want to do this. This is how I want to go about it. Here's the mission I want to have. And she was on board because she worked with us at Stanford Youth. So we started talking, reached back out to a couple of people in the USTA. Uh, we got approved to become a CTA within like a month and a half of me and her talking with each other. And so now we're at Six Love. We're websites up and Instagram's going. We're trying to put together some events. Who knows with this COVID situation that's going on.
I know.
But
I wish we were doing these interviews in person.
I know it would be so awesome.
Yeah.
But and then that's how I got really where I'm at today. Was I always think it was a random journey, but I really think that, God really, lined me up in this way to get to where I am now. So now I'm 10 years in teaching. I've worked for 2 indoor clubs. I've helped out at 3 country clubs. I've ran an NJTL for 4 years. So it's a
I
it's
know
been a crazy
you've done
journey.
amazing, and I've watched you grow in these last. I've been with USTA New England for 4 years now, and I've watched you grow, and I just appreciate your dedication to New England tennis, to tennis in general, and so your story is so inspiring, and I liked your comment about how you want to play tennis with your peers. And sometimes I think that is one of our USTA New England dialogues, is how do we have more camaraderie within the sport, and how do we make it more inclusive. And so now with so much happening in the world between COVID and these the social injustice is kind of on the front page every day. I do want to bring it back to that a little bit, and I'm just curious, how do you think tennis fits into that bigger social justice conversation? How do we make tennis more equitable? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about that.
I think for me, uh, the biggest thing for tennis is just making it more affordable and just making it more convenient for more people. I think just in Fairfield County alone, it's just hard to become a tennis player because, majority of the time you would play tennis would be indoors. You really look at it in Fairfield County, and indoor tennis here is just so expensive. And also, I think just for kids just to know all the different benefits that they can have from tennis. Because, I talk to kids all the time and I go, do you know how many schools will, waive your application fee, waive an essay just because they want tennis players? And they're like, what? That doesn't make sense. That they're not going to do that for tennis. And I tell kids this all the time, like, tennis is more than just a sport where you just play and you can think about going professional. There's so many different routes you can take, either if it's just by becoming a volunteer in the USTA, or just using it for school, or even if you want to coach part-time. I mean, I have so many friends that I know are looking for little small gigs or little part-time jobs, and then I have people at country clubs ask me, do you know anyone who's willing to work 4 or 5 hours? And they're the range of an hourly rate for a coach now are between 30 and 50. And then it's hard for me because it's like, oh, I do know people, but they don't play tennis. So the biggest thing for me. And growing up, I always went through a lot of the, oh, you play tennis, that's for white people. Like, why are you doing that? We don't do that, man. That's not for our people. Like, and I'm trying to tell them that, it's really for anybody. The sport it doesn't have a color base on it. It's an open sport. Anybody can play. You can play until you're 102 years old. And I always tell them, basketball, you're always going to need at least 9 more people to get a full court game. Tennis, you really just need one more person to get an official game. And
True.
so I try to preach that a lot, but I guess a lot for me when I was growing up and I was playing tennis, it was just that we didn't see that many people with the similar faces as us. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I always grew up hearing like a lot of smirky comments when I would play in tournaments, like, "Oh, I got the black kid today, so this should be an easy game." And then those always make me
Little
play.
did they know.
Those always made me play a little harder. Or I was in when I was at Bethany and we were at our tournament and the crowd sits up on top of us, and I would always hear the kids be like, "Wow, he plays really good for a black person." So it's always tough because you want to open everybody up to the world of tennis, but then you still have those people who put this box around the game.
That is like really a profound statement, saying that there's people that put a box around the game. And I think that is such a great analogy for those that are really trying to understand what the barriers are within tennis, because I think for the majority, tennis is, everybody loves tennis and they think it's this, very, very inclusive sport. But there are, unfortunately, people, I think, that do put some barriers and make these kind of comments that, are just not acceptable. And so, I think by sharing your story, it really is going to help people understand, we still have some work to do. And at least from USTA New England standpoint, we are doing our best as quickly as possible to, we're still figuring out all the different ways of, how do we make the sport inclusive for pretty much everybody. So I love that imagery because I think it's very enlightening and helpful. So because of that box, and I'm sure you've had, because of all your youth coaching, what is your message to our younger kids of color? How do you inspire them? Like, what have been some conversations that you may have had on or off court with some of our younger players?
My biggest thing that I tell a lot of the youth players is that failure is okay. And I tell them that all the time. I tell them, I failed more times than I truly think I've succeeded. But it's what I got out of my failures that made me like the stronger player. When I was at Bethany towards the end of my time there before I transferred out, I wasn't doing the greatest in academics. I was going through a lot of family problems, and I simply just couldn't do it anymore. But out of me, failing from that Bethany experience, I came back. I started working, teaching tennis again, and even just working at the restaurant. And then, boom, I find myself at Kings Highway. So I always tell kids that, it's not about failing, it's but what you do after you fail. My grandma always said, you can fall 10 times, but if you don't get up the 11th time, then that's when you're really out of luck. So I always tell kids, you got to keep going and just being uncomfortable for a while. I think that a lot of times today, just with kids and social media, that every kid can see how everybody else is living life, because you have Snapchat stories, you have TikToks of people. So everybody has this like one image of, what life looks like or what the one road is. And I'm trying to tell people it's not a one-way street. I didn't take the same route as a lot of my other friends did in tennis, or even a lot of my friends that just simply went to college. It's really about the journey that life gives you. We all have a different time clock, and you just got to let your time clock go at its own pace. So I always tell kids, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay if, your friends graduate before you, as long as you know what your plan is, or you see your friends getting apartments, or your friends have these grades, or they're going to these schools. That's okay. Maybe you should go to a community college, but it has to be your own road to success. So I always tell kids, learn from your failures and be okay with being uncomfortable. Those are like my biggest two messages.
Well, that is so inspiring. I'm inspired. I wish you were my tennis coach. I just really appreciate you sharing everything today, Marcus. You are truly helping us make the sport more inclusive. You give a lot back to USTA New England in ways that you probably can't even imagine. So I just want to thank you for, all of your tennis, your blood, sweat, and tears, I'm sure, for the game, and, what you've been giving back to us as a volunteer, both at the national and section level. It's much, much appreciated. And I'm just looking forward to more, hearing more about what Marcus Hooks is doing and how Six Love is going to take off.
Yes. And I don't know if you've seen our website, but it is up and running now, sixlovetennis.org.
Wonderful. Yes. I will be sure to check that out when we get off the call. So Marcus, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and stories. I'm I already, I knew you, but now I'm like, wow, I know so much more about you. And kudos to your dad for putting that racket in your hand when you were 4. So
I know.
thanks again, Marcus, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Chantal. You have a great one.
You too.